The sun was sinking low behind the dusty hills when Ethan Hale guided his tired horse down the long trail that led home. The wheels of his wagon creaked under the weight of supplies from town, and the sound of the wind whistled softly through the open land. It was a quiet evening, the kind that stretched wide and lonely across the frontier. Ethan lived alone on his ranch miles from the nearest town, and silence had long become his closest companion. But that evening, something broke the silence. As his horse neared the old fence by the western edge of his land, he saw movement, something small, half hidden near a fence post. He pulled on the reins, squinting through the golden light. At first he thought it was just a bundle of cloth caught in the wind, but when it shifted again he realized it was a person. He climbed down from the wagon, his boots sinking into the soft dirt. "Hello there," he called out, his voice calm but cautious. No answer came, only the whisper of wind through dry grass. He took a few careful steps forward. Then he saw her clearly, a young woman sitting on the ground with her knees drawn close to her chest. Her dress was dusty, torn at the hem, and her shoes looked worn thin from walking. She lifted her head slowly as he approached. Her face was pale, her lips dry, and her eyes full of something between fear and exhaustion. "Ma'am," Ethan said softly. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head faintly. "No, sir. Just tired." Her voice was weak, almost a whisper. "Please, I just needed to rest. I'll move on soon." Ethan studied her quietly for a moment. She looked like she hadn't eaten in days. He took off his hat and spoke in a kind, steady tone. "You don't have to go anywhere tonight. My house is close. You can rest there, get something to eat." The woman hesitated, her hands tightening around the edge of her dress. "I don't want any trouble," she said softly. "There's no trouble here," Ethan replied. "Come on now. You look like you could use a warm meal." He held out his hand. For a moment she didn't move, but then, slowly, she placed her hand in his. Her skin was cold and trembling. Ethan helped her stand, and though she tried to steady herself, her legs wobbled. He guided her carefully to the wagon and helped her climb in. His horse began to walk again, hooves clopping softly on the dry earth. Neither of them spoke much on the short ride. She sat quietly, her gaze lost somewhere in the fading sunset. When they reached the small ranch house, the dog barked once from the porch but quickly quieted when Ethan spoke a soft word. Inside, the room was warm from the fire burning in the stove. Ethan guided her to a wooden chair near the hearth. "Sit down. I'll get you some water." She nodded faintly, her shoulders tense as if she still expected harm. Ethan poured a cup from the jug and set it in front of her. "Go ahead. Drink." She took it carefully in both hands, drinking slow as if afraid the kindness might disappear if she moved too fast. "Thank you," she whispered. "You're welcome," Ethan said simply. "Name's Ethan Hale. This is my ranch." "What's your name?" She looked at the fire before answering. "Clara," she said quietly. "Clara Morgan." "Well, Miss Morgan," Ethan said, "you're safe here tonight. You can stay in the spare room. It's small but warm." She looked up sharply, surprise flickering in her tired eyes. "You'd let me stay?" "Course I would," Ethan said. No decent man leaves someone out in the cold. Her eyes filled with sudden tears. She turned her face away and spoke in a broken whisper. "You're the first man who didn't hurt me." The words made Ethan pause. He didn't ask what she meant. He just stood there for a moment, the quiet filling the space between them. Then he said softly, "Well, Miss Clara, you'll find peace here. No one's gonna harm you under my roof." He left her by the fire and went to fetch a bowl of stew left from earlier. When he returned, she was sitting with her hands folded in her lap, still uncertain. He placed the bowl in front of her and said gently, "Eat. You need your strength." She ate slowly at first, then with growing hunger. He could tell she'd gone too long without a proper meal. When she finished, she thanked him again in that small, quiet voice. Ethan showed her the spare room. "There's a blanket on the bed. It's not much, but it's clean. You rest as long as you need." Clara nodded, her eyes glistening in the lamplight. "Thank you, Ethan. I didn't expect kindness tonight." "You don't have to thank me," he said. "Just rest easy." That night, Ethan sat alone by the fire long after she'd gone to bed. He couldn't stop thinking about her words. Out here on the frontier, people carried all kinds of pain, but something in her voice had shaken him, like she'd been living in fear for a long time. He stirred the fire absently, wondering what her story was, and finally went to his own room. Sometime during the night, he woke to the sound of soft footsteps. He heard her pacing quietly, perhaps unable to sleep. He didn't get up or speak. He just listened until the footsteps stopped. Then the ranch fell silent again. When dawn came, the sky blushed with pale orange light. Ethan went outside to feed the horses and gather water. When he returned, Clara was already awake, sitting on the porch wrapped in a blanket he'd left by the door. Her eyes were on the horizon, watching the sunrise like someone who hadn't seen beauty in a long time. "Morning," Ethan said, stepping up beside her. "Morning," she answered softly. "It's beautiful here." "It is," he said. "Coffee?" She smiled faintly. "Please." They drank in quiet peace, the only sound the lowing of cattle in the distance. After a while, Ethan spoke. "You got somewhere you plan to go, Clara?" She looked down. "Nowhere safe," he nodded slowly. "Then stay here a while. Work, if you like. The ranch always needs hands." Her eyes widened a little. "You'd really let me?" "Sure," he said easily. "You can cook, maybe help with small chores. I'll pay you fair." Tears welled again in her eyes, though she blinked them back quickly. "I can work hard. I won't be a burden." "Didn't say you were," he replied with a kind smile. And just like that, something shifted between them, a small bit of trust beginning to grow. Over the next few days, Clara helped around the house. She swept floors, gathered eggs, and cooked simple meals. At first, she moved carefully, always glancing over her shoulder as though waiting for anger. But Ethan never raised his voice or made harsh demands. He thanked her when she cooked. He spoke gently when she made mistakes. Slowly, she began to relax. One afternoon, Ethan found her hanging laundry behind the house. The wind caught her hair, lifting it like sunlight through gold. When she noticed him watching, she smiled shyly. "I didn't think I'd ever feel calm again," she said. He nodded, hammer still in his hand from mending a fence. "You're doing fine, Clara. You've got a good spirit." She looked at him for a long moment. "I used to think kindness was something people only pretended to have," she said quietly. "But you prove me wrong every day." Ethan didn't know what to say to that. He only smiled a little and went back to work, though her words stayed with him all day. That evening, a soft rain began to fall. They sat by the fire after dinner, the sound of rain tapping against the windows. Clara mended one of his shirts with careful stitches. Ethan watched her hands move, steady and sure. "You've got skill with a needle," he said. "My mother taught me," she replied, "before everything changed." He didn't ask how or why things changed. He only said, "She taught you well." For the first time, Clara laughed, a soft, gentle sound that filled the small room like light. Ethan found himself smiling too. Later, as she prepared to sleep, she turned at the doorway. "Good night, Ethan, and thank you again for being kind." "Good night, Clara," he said. "You're safe here." When she closed the door, Ethan looked toward the window where the rain still fell. Out there, the land was wide and empty. But inside, for the first time in a long while, the ranch didn't feel so lonely. The days slowly turned into weeks, and Clara began to find her rhythm at the ranch. Every morning, she would wake before sunrise and start the fire in the stove while Ethan fed the horses. The two of them often worked side by side without many words, but a quiet understanding grew between them. The ranch, once lonely and still, now carried small sounds of life: footsteps on the porch, laughter from the kitchen, the hum of Clara's soft singing while she worked. Ethan noticed how she always tried to do more than she needed to. If he told her to rest, she would still find something to mend or clean. She was grateful, but also afraid to take too much comfort, as if rest was something she hadn't earned yet. He didn't push her. He just let her be, offering small kindnesses that didn't need words. One evening, he returned from checking the cattle to find the table already set. Clara stood by the stove, stirring a pot of stew, her hair tied back neatly. She turned when she heard him and smiled. "I hope you don't mind," she said. "I wanted to make supper tonight." He hung up his hat and nodded. "Smells better than anything I've made in months," he said. They sat together at the table. The firelight flickered between them. It was the first time Clara had laughed openly since she arrived. Ethan listened, smiling quietly, letting her talk about small things: the weather, the ranch dog, the way the sunsets looked over the hills. For someone who had once seemed so afraid, she spoke now with a soft joy that warmed the room. After supper, Ethan stepped outside to check the horses. And when he came back, he found Clara standing by the window, watching the night sky. "I never thought I'd feel safe enough to look at stars again," she said softly. He leaned against the doorway. "You're safe here, Clara. Always." Her eyes met his, shining in the lamplight. "I believe you," she said. From that night, something gentle began to grow between them. They shared meals, worked the land together, and sometimes rode out across the open plains when the chores were done. Ethan would show her how to guide the horse, how to steady her hands on the reins. She'd laugh when the horse went faster than she expected, and he'd call out, "You're doing fine." When the first snow of the season came, the ranch turned white and quiet. Ethan chopped wood while Clara baked bread and hung blankets by the fire. She hummed softly as the smell of warm bread filled the air. The house, once silent and lonely, felt alive again. One morning, a wagon appeared in the distance. Ethan saw it before Clara did. He narrowed his eyes against the sun. Travelers were rare in winter. When the wagon stopped by the fence, two men climbed down. They looked rough from the road. Clara came out of the barn carrying a basket and froze when she saw them. The color drained from her face. Ethan noticed her sudden fear. "You know them?" he asked quietly. She nodded slowly. "One of them used to travel with our group," she said, her voice trembling. "He's not a kind man." Ethan stepped forward, his hand resting calmly near his belt. The men called out, asking for water and directions. Ethan answered politely but firmly, never letting his guard drop. Clara stayed close to the porch, her fingers gripping the edge of the railing. When the men left a few minutes later, she finally let out the breath she'd been holding. Ethan turned to her. "You don't have to be afraid anymore. They won't trouble you here." Her eyes filled with tears, but this time not from fear. "You always stand between me and the world," she said softly. He shrugged a little. "Guess that's what neighbors are for," he said. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She stood at the window, watching the snow drift against the moonlight. When Ethan passed by her door, he noticed her awake and stopped. "Can't rest?" She shook her head. "Every time I close my eyes, I remember what it was like before I came here." Ethan stepped closer but didn't cross the room. His voice was gentle. "Those memories can't touch you now. You've got a new start. You've got a place." Her eyes softened. "You've given me that," she said quietly. "A home I never thought I'd have." He smiled faintly. "Then it's yours as long as you want it." Through the winter months, Clara grew stronger. She laughed more easily, worked with confidence, and even began teaching Ethan a few things, like how to make better coffee or patch a shirt without ruining it. He pretended to grumble but followed her advice all the same. Sometimes on calm evenings, they would sit on the porch and watch the stars. She would talk about her dreams for the future, learning to read better, maybe one day opening a small store in town. Ethan would listen, saying little but always smiling at her hope. One afternoon in early spring, Clara rode with him out to the far pasture. The grass was green again and the air smelled clean. She looked across the wide land and said, "It feels like I've been waiting my whole life to breathe like this." Ethan looked at her, his eyes soft. "Maybe you were waiting to find the right place." She turned to him, smiling gently. "Or the right person." The words hung in the air between them, quiet and honest. Ethan didn't answer right away. He just looked out at the horizon, the wind brushing through his hair. Then he said quietly, "Sometimes the right people find each other without even meaning to." From that day, there was something new in the way they spoke and looked at each other. It wasn't rushed or loud, it was calm, steady, and real. Clara started to hum while she cooked, and Ethan found excuses to stay near the house longer than he used to. Then one morning, a letter came from town. It was addressed to Clara. Her hands trembled when she saw the name. It was from her younger sister, whom she had thought she'd never hear from again. She read the letter aloud by the fire, her voice shaking with joy. Her sister was safe, living with another family in the West. Ethan listened quietly, then said, "That's good news, Clara. Maybe one day you'll visit her." Clara nodded. "I want to, but I don't think I could ever leave this place for long." He looked at her then, really looked, at the peace in her eyes, the strength she had built piece by piece. "Then you don't have to," he said. As spring turned to summer, life at the ranch became steady and full. They worked the fields together, shared stories at night, and sometimes rode out to the river just to sit by the water. Clara often thought back to the day she first met Ethan, how scared she had been, how sure she was that all kindness came with a price. But Ethan had proved her wrong every single day. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, she stood beside him on the porch. The sky was a deep orange, the air warm and calm. She turned to him and said softly, "Do you remember the first thing I said to you?" He smiled. "You said I was the first man who didn't hurt you." She nodded. "I still mean it, but now, you're also the first man who made me feel whole again." Ethan's voice was low. "And you're the first woman who brought light back to this place." They stood there together as the last light faded. Neither spoke again for a while. There was no need. The silence between them was peaceful, full of things that didn't have to be said. Inside, the fire glowed softly. The house that had once been only wood and walls had become a home, a place of safety, of healing, of quiet love built on trust and kindness. Clara knew that her past no longer owned her. She had found her strength again, not through fighting, but through the steady gentleness of one man who showed her what care truly meant. And Ethan, once alone in the wide, empty land, finally understood that sometimes the greatest change came not from battles or storms, but from the soft voice of someone who simply said, "Thank you for being kind." The wind outside settled and the stars began to shine. The ranch was still, wrapped in warmth and peace. For the first time in a long while, both of them knew they were exactly where they were meant to be.